After the orange and white game, this Texas football team realized they needed some big depth up front, and big they got in the former 300-plus pounder Bill Norton at the defensive tackle position, committing to the 40 acres yesterday.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, the latest commitment to the 40 acres, Bill Norton, transfer defensive tackle from Arizona, now a Texas Longhorn. In the second segment, after the orange and white game, based on everything we've heard this spring, my unofficial depth chart of how things should look going into the season, or at least going into fall camp at this point, post-spring. And then in the last segment, Jordan Pope, point guard from Oregon State in the portal, will be choosing between Texas and Texas A&M tomorrow. In the last segment, I tell you why we need to make sure that Jordan Pope ends up a Longhorn. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So one thing that we have given this staff continual praise for in the past is the ability to identify a need, and then the ability to go out and correct and damn near overcorrect, right, that need, right? We saw it firsthand in 2021 and really even in 2022. We didn't have enough receivers, right, to complement Xavier Worthy or go out and play at the highest level. Part of that was because Jordan Whittington was unable to stay healthy, right? Now, when you look at the wide receiver room, it looks like we have 8 guys that can play. Last year, we felt like safety, right? Really, over the last couple of years, we felt like safety wasn't a strong point for us. We brought in Jalen Catalon and out of the portal. That didn't work out. You double back this year and you bring in Andrew Makuba, right? Same thing with edge, right? You brought in Colin Simmons and Trey Moore over the last 2 seasons because you felt like you had good production from the edge position, but you want great to elite production at that position. And we came into the season, or in the offseason, fairly questioning what we had at the defensive tackle position. And on top of not only questioning what we had, questioning if what we had would be enough to replace 2 all-world, all-American talents in T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, right? So there was fair questions about what we had at the position and who we had at the position, if they would be able to maintain a defense that was top 3 in run defense last year and really was the bread and butter of this football team, being able to run the ball and being able to stop the run, right? So we knew there were question marks at the defensive tackle position, and then Steve Sarkisian and staff all but admitted that, right, in one of their recent press conferences, right? This is a team that, you know, as Steve Sarkisian and his staff have said, they like to have 6 defensive tackles in that room that they can rely on, right? They, you know, rotate a lot, right? Just because, 1, they're big bodies, but 2, you're playing a lot of games in Texas and Austin, Texas in August and September, where it's hot as hell, right? Temperatures getting up to 98, sometimes 100 plus, right? And so you're going to have to rotate those big bodies. And when you're 300 plus pounds, right, being fresh means just as much as being talented, right? There's no point in having T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy out there if they're huffing and puffing, right? And so you need to rotate. This is a Texas football team last year that had 5 defensive tackles that played 245 snaps or more, right? Between T'Vondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, Alfred Collins, Vernon Broughton, and Trill Carter. So you would expect that that is the standard at the University of Texas. We need at least 5 defensive tackles that can go out there and play 240 plus snaps for you in a season, which means they would be vital, players on this Texas football team. And the goal is 6, but last year it seems like we only had 5 based on the way that the snaps, were divvied out, because I think the 6th player was Jere Bledsoe and he played less than 10 snaps. So really we relied on 5 players at that position last year, but 6 is the ideal number. Coming into this season, I think Steve Sarkisian has identified 3 players that he's comfortable with at the position thus far: Alfred Collins, Vernon Broughton, and Tia Savea, right? And even with those 3 players, I don't think any of us are fully confident in what we're going to get this year. I expect, Alfred Collins to have his best season, Vernon Broughton to break out somewhat, and I think Tia Savea will be really good depth. But none of us know what we're going to get from the defensive tackle position this year. And it made sense to go into this spring portal window looking for more bodies, looking for more depth, looking for more opportunities for players at that position to step in and step up. Because some of the players behind Collins, Broughton, and Savea up until this point have not proven to the staff that they have the size or production that is considered to be a standard at that position at the University of Texas based on what we've had the last few years. So when you look at players like Aaron Bryant, Jere Bledsoe, Sadir Mitchell, Alex January, those are players that are in that room right now that for whatever reason, all right, the staff and Steve Sarkisian have not been impressed enough yet, right, or have not seen enough yet to be able to elevate them into the top 6 in the rotation, right? And so you have to go out into the portal and try to find players to supplement that depth or be huge pieces for you on this football team this year. So that's why we saw the staff go out and identify 3 defensive tackles early on in this second portal window that they wanted to bring into the 40 acres, right? You had Dominic Williams, not sure how to say his name. It's spelled weird, from TCU, who they're still recruiting. He's expected to make a decision in the next couple of weeks. They were recruiting Jay Toya from UCLA, who made the decision yesterday to go back to UCLA. He was at the orange and white game this past Saturday. And then Bill Norton, who was teammates with Tia Savea last season at Arizona, he was at the orange and white game on Saturday, and he ultimately committed to the University of Texas yesterday. And I think now you at least, Texas fans, Texas staff, and Steve Sarkisian can say, okay, we at least have 4 players at that position that we think we can rely on at a high level this season. When you look at, Bill Norton last year, this will be his 5th year, in college. So there's great experience there. He spent his first 4 years at the University of Georgia, played limited snaps, had limited playing time, but he was a part of 2 national championship teams. I think that's great value. Also being in a room with Kirby Smart defensively for 4 straight years, I think that's great value as well. And then when you looked at it at Arizona last year, him being paired with Tia Savea up front, they had one of the best run defenses in the country. They don't run the ball a ton in the Pac-12, so there's some context to those numbers. But nonetheless, they were really productive at Arizona last year. And Norton himself had his best season, of course, had his most opportunity leaving Georgia, and just all the talented players they have there, NFL players on the line. He posted 31 tackles, 2 forced fumbles at Arizona last season, and had a 70.6 PFF grade on the season, which would have ranked 4th on the Texas football team last year behind T'Vondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, and Alfred Collins. So if the goal is to get to 5 or 6 viable players in that defensive tackle room that you think can go out and play at a high level for you this season, then I think based on what the staff has told us, right, we already have Alfred Collins, we have Vernon Broughton, we have Tia Savea, and we now have his teammate from last season, Bill Norton, who should be your top 4 in that rotation. We were expecting a guy like Sadir Mitchell, who was a top 150 to 200 recruit. Can't remember where he, actually fell, to be that guy. And coming into his sophomore year, it seems like things still aren't clicking. We heard about him being, 370 plus, maybe overweight, and maybe some other concerns there. I think Alex January can put it on, at some point, but he's a true freshman, right? There's a learning curve there. I think Jere Bledsoe, who has had a good spring based on what we've heard, may just be too small at the position, because that's one thing that was mentioned specifically, not just the production, but the size that they want at that position. And just haven't really heard anything about Aaron Bryant, period. So this is a position that we had question marks about coming into the offseason. I think based on what we saw in the spring, the staff gave these guys a chance to compete. The staff gave these guys an opportunity to put themselves in that top 5 to 6 rotation. And it looks like only 3 players made it. So they had a need, right? They went out and attacked that need. Unfortunately, Jay Toya decided to go back to UCLA. We'll see what happens with Dominic Williams from TCU. But nonetheless, you added another member to that rotation, and you added somebody who could be a really good player for you in Bill Norton from Arizona last year to Texas this year. And I love the quote that Steve Sarkisian said, right? Because he said, when you're going out in the portal and you're looking for players at the defensive tackle position, you're not looking for the player that can come in and win the Outland Trophy, right? Basically saying, like, you're not looking for the player to come in and be an All-American like T'Vondre Sweat was. But sometimes if you're looking for a rotation of 5 to 6 players, you may need to go out in the portal and get number 4, right? You may need to go out in the portal and get number 5. Having great depth and having fresh legs is almost as important, especially at that position, as having a ton of talent in the room, right? So maybe Bill Norton is number 4, right? Maybe Bill Norton is number 3. Maybe he's number 5. Nonetheless, he's another body that you can throw out there in 98-degree weather in Austin, Texas in September, and he can play at a high level with the rest of those guys in the room. So huge pickup, literally huge, 330 plus pounds, huge. And Bill Norton from Arizona, he has familiarity with Tia Savea being his teammate last year. And then Johnny Nansen, our linebacker coach, being his defensive coordinator last year. I still think that they want to bring in another body at this position, but they've done a good job thus far in bolstering depth that they did not think they had prior to the commitment of Bill Norton yesterday. A quick word from our sponsors, and then my unofficial depth chart based on what we saw in the orange and white game. Who should be starting and who should be in the 2 deep. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is the ticketing app that you need to use because there's so many features that'll make your life easier. Priority last minute deals. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Flash deals. Save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. Zone deals. You save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose the seats. The all-in pricing is my favorite feature. Toggling this feature shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. The seat views. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. The lowest price guarantee or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. That's more money than you put in. Gametime ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. This episode of Locked On Longhorns is also brought to you by FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, so we're a long way from, I guess, our first official or unofficial depth chart in Too Deep. We won't get that until August 31st, and obviously things will still change. We're still expecting, as I mentioned in the first segment, to bring in some players out of the portal. You know, obviously another defensive tackle would be nice, but, you know, I'm sure that there's some other positions that they're eyeing in the portal, or maybe some other players that they think they can bring in to fortify this roster heading into the 2024 season. And you know, we still may lose some players from this Texas football team, right? There's been a lot of smoke recently about Terrence Brooks. I hope it's not true. But, you know, when you're at the University of Texas and you have crazy talent the way that we do, you know, you would expect a lot of players to want to come here. But you also have more players here than you can play, right? And so when that happens, especially in this era, you'd expect some players to leave as well. So I'm not saying Terrence Brooks is going to enter the portal, anything like that. That's just the smoke, right? And it's my job to come on here and at least entertain the smoke. So when we talk about the depth chart and how it should look post-spring, this is just my opinion, right? Based on what I've seen and what I've heard. Doesn't mean I'm right? Doesn't mean I know more than the coaches. You know, they probably forgotten more football than I'll ever know, right? This is just my opinion on what I think the depth chart should look like right now. I'm not even saying this is what the depth chart should look like on August 31st, right? This is what the depth chart should look like right now. Starting at quarterback, it has to be Quinn Ewers, right? And I was very purposeful in saying that the way I said that, in terms of it has to be Quinn Ewers. I think when you allow Quinn to come back, right, because that's a mutual decision. Quinn can't just come back, right? The staff had to say, we welcome you back, even with Arch Manning here. Then you've essentially pledged that Quinn Ewers will be the starting quarterback, right? You can't bring Quinn back and then make Arch Manning the starting quarterback, right? Just in terms of the look, the perception, how that might affect recruiting in the future. It's just bad business, right? So when you told Quinn Ewers to come back to the University of Texas, you told him in that moment that he was going to be the starting quarterback and there would be no quarterback competition. So we are handling it the right way. But based on everything we've heard about Arch Manning and based on what we saw from Arch Manning in the spring game on Saturday, Arch Manning deserves to be in a quarterback competition, even though you can't play it like a quarterback competition, because you obviously told Quinn Ewers to come back for one reason, to be your starting quarterback heading into the SEC. So Quinn will be the starter. He should be the starter, but I think Arch has played well enough to make it a competition. But because of the situation, you can't make it a competition. Now, what will make it interesting is, let's say Quinn Ewers is not playing up to par through the first 7 games, right? Georgia is the 7th game. So I think that would be the big barometer. So let's say Quinn Ewers is not playing up to par through the first 7 games. The offense looks clunky. Quinn does not look like a Heisman candidate. There's some real inconsistencies there. Do you ride with Quinn throughout the whole season no matter what? Or does Arch get a look at that point? Is it a Spencer Rattler, Caleb Williams situation? Or is it Quinn till death do us part this season? I think that's the interesting part. There can't be a quarterback competition. I fully understand that, even though Arch has earned that, But the interesting part is Quinn Ewers the starter throughout the entire season, no matter what? And I'm going to knock on wood, because hopefully we don't even have to answer that question. Hopefully Quinn is playing so well that this is purely a hypothetical and stays purely a hypothetical, Quinn is and should be your starting quarterback. At running back, Jaden Blue should be your number one running back. Now, this really doesn't matter because you can still give them both the same amount of touches. Like even when we saw the first two games, Jonathan Brooks wasn't lacking for touches, even though Cedric Baxter technically started the game. So whether Jaden Blue or Cedric Baxter starts, to me, it's just more important that Jaden Blue gets the majority or at least the same amount of touches as Cedric Baxter, because I think he's the best running back on the team. I think Trey Wisner should be your number 3 running back. Things got a little bit more clear in that room with Savion Red hitting the transfer portal, which I completely understand. He's good enough to be a starter somewhere, not sure where, but definitely good enough to be a starter or be in a bigger role somewhere else. And I pray that we beat enough teams really bad this year to see Jared Gibson and Christian Clark in a big role, because I just think they're really good running backs. I think they're going to be a really good tandem at the 40 acres, and I would like to see them sooner than later. And I definitely don't want to deal with an announcement of one of them hitting the portal in the future, because I think they're going to be great running backs at the 40. At tight end, I got Gunnar Helm and Amari Niblack as my number 1 and my number 2, and I got Jordan Washington at my number 3. I said on yesterday's episode that I think he's the future of the tight end position at the 40 acres. He's your future JT Sanders. He's your mismatch problem, regardless of who you're playing against, right? Too big, too physical for safeties, too quick, too agile for linebackers, right? And, you know, I know Juan Davis has a ton of potential. I know we've been talking about that potential for a long time, and I know they brought him back out of the portal for a reason. They think he can be a really good player for this football team, but I think Jordan Washington is the future at the tight end position, and I think he should be groomed as such. And I also think he can come in right away as the number 3 tight end this year and make plays if asked to. So, but like I said, I think he's the future, your starter the next couple of years at the 40 acres, and he should be groomed as such this season. In terms of the wide receiver room, I have Isaiah Bond, Jonte Cook, DeAndre Moore, and Ryan Wingo as your top 4 receivers. I know you brought in Silas Bolden and Matthew Golden out of the transfer portal, but it's a really competitive room right now, right? And somebody's going to have to be sad that they're not getting the ball enough or not getting enough opportunities, whether it's the players I mentioned or players I didn't mention, right? I think Matthew Golden could be your starting punt returner and kick returner and could definitely come in and be a viable wide receiver when you need him to be, right? We haven't seen Silas Bolden yet because he's not on campus, but I think in spurts, he can come in and be a playmaker for you. But I think in terms of your number 4 or your top 4 wide receivers that you're going to count on game in and game out to be your biggest playmakers on the season, Isaiah Bond, Jonte Cook, DeAndre Moore, and Ryan Wingo would be the group for me, right? Obviously, that could change throughout the course of the offseason or going into the season. Silas Bolden could show up next month and be the best receiver on the team, right? I'm not sure. And then this would have to change. But based on what we've heard thus far, those 4 guys should be your top 4 guys in the wide receiver rotation. Starting in line should be the same as last year, right? That's the appeal of bringing all of these players back outside of Christian Jones, who's headed to the National Football League. Kelvin Banks, Hayden Connor, Jake Majors, and Devon Campbell, right? Bring that consistency and that continuity from last year's offensive line, and then you replace Christian Jones with Cam Williams, who has been on campus 2 years going into his 3rd year. And I think Cole Hudson should be your interior lineman that comes off the bench first in terms of left or right guard, and he's worked at, center for his last 3 years, so he could even spell Jake Majors at that position, I believe. And then I think Trevor Gooseby is your swing tackle coming off the bench, right? Knock on wood again. Hopefully nothing happens to Cam Williams or Kelvin Banks throughout the season. You would like to see them play all the meaningful snaps this year, right? But if anything were to happen, I think Trevor Gooseby is your first tackle off the bench, right? So those are your top 7 linemen. I think your 5 starters, your interior lineman coming off to replace the 3 interior positions is Cole Hudson, and then Trevor Gooseby is your swing tackle that could come in and play the left or right side, hopefully, if something were to happen to Kelvin Banks or Cam Williams. Moving to the defensive side, I think at the edge position, you got Trey Moore and Baron Sorrell as your starters. I think you want to bring it along at least a little bit slowly for Colin Simmons. Now, if you put him in the game and he starts just going crazy and he's all world, then you move him into that starting role, right? Or at least give him starter, snaps or, starter rotation, however you want to do it, right? But I think you start off with Trey Moore and Baron Sorrell. Baron Sorrell was good enough last year to not lose his job, at least just yet, right? I think he can start off as a veteran presence, a really good edge rusher, and if Colin Simmons takes his job, he takes it. But I think Baron Sorrell has earned to be the starter day one. And then you got Ethan Burke, Colin Simmons, and Colton Vasek as your primary depth coming off the bench after that. So that's 5. I mean, you still got Justice Finkley, Tassili Akana, other players in that room that can make a difference. But I think your top 5, top 2 should be Trey Moore, Baron Sorrell, and then Ethan Burke, Colin Simmons, and Colton Vasek is a hell of a trio behind those top 2 at the edge position. Defensive tackle, we kind of talked about this already in the first segment, but I think Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton are your Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy this year, not in terms of production, but just in terms of your top 2 those are the guys. And then I think right now, right, at least based on everything we've heard in the tea leaves, the two guys behind him are the two Arizona transfers, right? Bill Norton and Tia Savea. I think that's the top four they're comfortable with right now. Hopefully they can bring in somebody else out of the portal, or hopefully somebody out of Aaron Bryant, Sadir Mitchell, Jere Bledsoe, or Alex January can step in and fill in that fifth or sixth role this season. At linebacker, it's pretty simple, right? It's what we thought it was coming into the offseason. I don't think it'll change at all. Anthony Hill, David Benda, and Mo Blackwell are your three primary linebackers. At corner, this is where it gets interesting a little bit for me, especially with the Terrence Brooks rumors that we've heard, right? We've heard a lot about him working with the second team, right? And obviously with him rumored to enter the portal, right? That's probably consistent and probably something that, he believes that he's headed for the second team as well, right? And he was a starter last year and started at times the year before, right? When you look at it, I think your starting corners, based on what we've seen last year and, this year up until the orange and white game, I guess, and after, I think Jade Barron should be your starter, but they should experiment with him outside. I know the deep speed could be a concern depending on who he's lined up against, but I think Jade Barron should be a starter outside because I do think he's one of your three best corners and he'll figure it out. I think Manny Muhammad has to be a starter on the other side at the corner position. And I think at the star position, it's Jalen Gilbo. Obviously, you're going to rotate, right? They did a really good job of rotating last year. So I think players like Terrence Brooks, Gavin Holmes, and Kobe Black could come in and get opportunity. But I think your three starters, and Austin Jordan as well, but I think your three starters, your primary corners, should be Jade Barron, Malik Muhammad, and Jalen Gilbo. I think those are the three best corners on the team right now. And then everybody behind them should be rotational depth, right? That's just my opinion based on what we've seen. Could be right, could be wrong. This is my opinion. And then at the safety position, I'm going to get ahead of this now. Michael Taft, right? Like Michael Taft should be a starter. He's one of the best players on the football team. Michael Taft, right? Then Andrew Makuba and Derek Williams. I know two safeties start at a time. I don't care how the rotation is. I just want those three players on the field a lot, playing at a high level. But Michael Taft more than likely will be a starter because, as I said yesterday, and just as I've learned over the last 3 years, Michael Taft is inevitable. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we shift gears to the basketball team. Is Jordan Pope the point guard the Texas Longhorns are looking for to make a run this season? Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I'm competitive, very competitive. I've been told at times I'm too competitive, but competition is a part of life, right? We want to win and we don't want to lose. That's what competition, that's what breeds. And I definitely don't want to lose when I'm playing Monopoly Go. Me and 150 other million people that have downloaded the app. It's a great twist on Monopoly where you play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is messing with my friends. I can charge them rent on my iconic properties, just like classic Monopoly. But now I can also heist their vaults of riches for myself. And the leaderboards showed me who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. But it's not just my competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends and people all around the world in time tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or Google Play. All right, so moving into the basketball team, and can't remember when it was. I guess it was not last week, but like 2 weeks ago. Rodney Terry did a really good job. I think it was last weekend coming into last week, maybe. That probably sounded confusing, but Rodney Terry did a really good job of going out in the portal and attacking the needs of the basketball team, right? You go out and get, a potential superstar level player, a huge name in Tremont Mark. Somebody who's a threat to score 30 on any given night. You bring him back to the state of Texas, a la Max Asmus. You kind of make him the center point of your basketball team going into next year. Of course, also with Trey Johnson, 5-star, top 6 recruit in the country. You expect them to be your dynamic scoring duo next year. You bring in Jason Kent, who I think will be an upgrade on this basketball team over Dylan Mitchell. Obviously, Dylan Mitchell has more NBA traits, right? He's sexier, to NBA evaluators, but I think Jason Kent, somebody who can stretch the floor, can knock down the open three, is a really good rebounder and a really good pick and roll 4, right? Or stretch 4. I think he brings more versatility and opens up the court for our basketball team more than Dylan Mitchell could. And I think you bring in a really experienced and savvy point guard in Julian Larry, right? That does a lot for this basketball team on the defensive side, but just does a really good job as a playmaker and knocking down open threes, right? And so you brought in some really versatile pieces to this Texas basketball team thus far that gave you a ton of what you were missing last year. And I think another piece to that is Jordan Pope. I talked about last year, we really just had inconsistent outside shooting and inconsistent playmaking, right? Those were the inconsistencies that we had on offense, right? Or the negatives that we had on offense. We could not knock down open shots. We had inconsistent playmaking. One game we would have 20 assists. The next game we would have 5 assists. And we turned the ball over way too much all season, right? And I think to alleviate that, or one of the ways to alleviate that, right, aside from what you've already done, which is bring in really good shooting, is to bring in one of the best point guards in the country last year, who was also a really good shooter, but would help you a ton as your primary ball handler, limiting those turnovers, right? And being more efficient with your offensive opportunities. Jordan Pope, 6'2", 165 pounds from Oakley, California, was at Oregon State last year. I tried to find out the reason he actually transferred. It could be just for a bigger opportunity, but also, with realignment and everything, we saw the great Tara Vanderveer retire as Stanford women's basketball coach. There were some players in the Pac-12 on the women's side that decided to transfer because, they don't know, there's really no stability in terms of, athletics in the future at Oregon State. And it could be the same thing with Jordan Pope, right? I'm not even sure they know what conference they're going to be playing basketball in next year. It would make sense for him to go where the going is good. And it looks like that's going to be either Texas or Texas A&M. Those are the two schools he's choosing from at this point. At Oregon State last year, Jordan Pope as a sophomore averaged 17.6 points per game. It's really good, as well as 3 assists and 2 rebounds per game. But what's even better is the efficiency he got those numbers at. He slashed 45% from the field, 37% from the 3, and 88% from the free throw line last season. That'll work. A 3-level scorer, 3-point line, mid-range, and the basket. He can score on all 3 levels. He can shoot the 3 or the tough 2, mid-range, long 2, and he can get to the rim. He can make shots off the dribble, or he can catch and shoot. So that's how you build an offense, right? Versatile guards, right? He can play on ball and be efficient. He can play off ball and be efficient. That's how you build an offense. We did not have that last year. 23% assist rate as a lead primary guard, right? Really good at protecting the ball, really good at getting the ball to his teammates and not turning it over. 80th percentile catch and shoot last season. Only 20% of players in the country were more efficient on catch and shoot opportunities than Jordan Pope. 79th percentile score off the high ball screen, right? The high pick and roll. I mean, it's not always a pick and roll. Sometimes the player doesn't roll. Sometimes he doesn't pop. Sometimes he stands there. Sometimes he re-screens, right? But off that high ball screen, Jordan Pope was a 79th percentile scorer off the high ball screen last year. So only 21% of players in the country were more efficient scoring off the high ball screen than Jordan Pope. At Texas, we ran a lot of, horn sets, high ball screens. He would fit right in. And then 71% scorer coming off ball screens, right? So when he's not on the ball, but he's off the ball, ball movement, player movement, that's what wins games, right? When he's running off the ball to get a shot, he was 71st percentile in those opportunities. So only 29% of players in the country were more efficient in those opportunities than Jordan Pope. So a great playmaker, great shooter that can score at all 3 levels. I think he can be your primary playmaker next year. And on any given night, he can be your primary scorer, secondary scorer, or your third scorer, right? And once again, that is how you build an offense. And now you're looking at a potential starting lineup of Jordan Pope, Trey Johnson, Tremont Mark, Jason Kent, Caden Shedrick, if you can't find an upgrade at the center position, with Julian Larry, Kendall Weaver, and Nick Cody coming off the bench. So a really strong 8-man rotation right now. I think they can still make it a really strong 8 to 10-man rotation, or maybe make it a really strong 10-man rotation and then probably get it down to 9 by the time the tournament comes. But I think Rodney Terry has done an exceptional job of recruiting thus far out of the high school ranks and then in the transfer portal based on the deficiencies we had last year. And if Jordan Pope commits to the University of Texas tomorrow, you are looking at one of the best basketball teams in the country. And I'm not being biased. This is just pure fact. You are looking at one of the best basketball teams and one of the best constructed rosters heading into college basketball next season at the 40 acres. If Jordan Pope commits to the University of Texas tomorrow, and hopefully one more time, Texas can prove to A&M that they're big bro. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hug 'em. Peace.